The Black Maid was harassed by guests, until the Mafia boss revealed their secrets. Sarah had always known her place. As a maid at one of the most exclusive mansions in the city, she had learned long ago how to stay out of the way, keep her head down, and let the world of the rich pass her by. But today was different. The guests at the lavish dinner party were not as kind as usual. They laughed loudly, ignoring her presence as they picked apart her appearance. "Look at that accent," one of them sneered. "She's just a maid." The laughter echoed in the grand dining room, and Sarah felt the sting of every mocking word. Her hands trembled as she moved silently through the crowd, refilling glasses and clearing plates, her heart heavy with the weight of their insults. She had grown accustomed to this kind of treatment, but today, it felt unbearable. They mocked her for her clothes, for her accent, for everything that made her different. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that this was her job, and she was grateful for it, even if the people she served saw her as nothing more than invisible. But deep down, the humiliation burned. As Sarah turned to leave the room, a voice cut through the noise. "Enough." The room fell silent as the Mafia boss, Dominic Romano, stepped into the doorway. He had been watching from the shadows, observing the scene unfold without a word. His presence was commanding, his every movement deliberate. The guests who had been mocking Sarah now looked uneasy, their eyes darting toward him. Dominic's gaze moved from the guests to Sarah, and for the first time that evening, she felt seen. Without a word, he walked toward the table where the guests had been seated, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "You will apologize," he said in a voice that left no room for argument. The guests hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The tension in the room was palpable as Dominic's eyes scanned the crowd. He could have let it go, but something about the way they treated Sarah ignited something inside him. "Apologize. Now," he repeated, his voice firm, yet calm. The guests quickly mumbled apologies, their discomfort palpable as they tried to regain some semblance of composure. Sarah, still in shock, stood frozen in place. She had never imagined someone like Dominic Romano, the feared Mafia boss, would come to her defense. He turned back to her, his expression softening just slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, a stark contrast to his usual cold demeanor. Sarah nodded, though she was still too stunned to speak. For the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of respect from someone powerful, and it left her speechless. The guests, once smug and self-assured, now shrank back, their powerlessness evident. Dominic's intervention had turned the tables, and Sarah, once invisible, had become a symbol of something much greater than herself. As Dominic turned and walked away, leaving the guests to stew in their discomfort, he glanced back at Sarah. "You'll never be treated like that again," he promised, his words a quiet vow. Sarah watched him leave, her heart racing. It was a small moment, but it would change everything. Sarah stood there for a moment, still trying to process what had just happened. The room was quiet now. The guests who had mocked her moments ago were now looking at each other, unsure of what to do. They had been humbled, and in their eyes, Sarah could see a mixture of fear and disbelief. But for Sarah, something had changed. She felt the weight of her dignity returning, something she had thought lost forever. Her hands were still trembling, but now it was not from fear or humiliation. It was from the overwhelming sense of something new, something she had never experienced before, respect. She glanced toward the doorway where Dominic had entered, the Mafia boss whose presence had silenced the room with a single word. He was walking away now, his figure disappearing down the hallway, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he had just changed her life. No one had ever stood up for her like that. No one had ever treated her with such a quiet, unwavering authority. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth protecting. As the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, she found herself slowly moving toward the door, her heart still pounding in her chest. The guests had dispersed, the tension in the room now replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Sarah was left standing alone, but she didn't mind. She felt something stirring inside her that had been dormant for too long, a spark of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. She moved quietly down the hallway, her mind racing with questions. Why had Dominic done it? Why had he intervened for someone like her, a maid, a servant in his world of wealth and power? What had she done to earn his protection? She wasn't sure, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Maybe it wasn't about what she had done. Maybe it was about who she was. She had never asked for any special treatment, never expected anyone to defend her. But now, she felt like she had witnessed something incredible, something beyond her wildest imagination. Dominic Romano wasn't just a mafia boss. There was something more to him, something deeper, that she had yet to understand. She didn't have time to dwell on it, though. The evening was far from over. Sarah knew that her shift wasn't done yet. There were still dishes to be cleared, glasses to be refilled, and guests to be served. But something had shifted in her. She wasn't the same Sarah who had entered that room just hours ago. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone who had been seen, someone who had been recognized for her worth, if only for a brief moment. As she entered the kitchen, she tried to focus on the task at hand. The clinking of dishes and the bustle of the staff in the background helped ground her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the events of the evening. She could still hear Dominic's voice in her mind, that calm, commanding voice that had made the entire room fall silent. "You will apologize," he had said. It wasn't a request. It was an order, and the guests had obeyed without question. For the first time, Sarah felt the power of authority, not as something distant or unattainable, but as something that could be wielded by anyone, even by someone like Dominic. As she wiped down the counter, she couldn't help but think about what Dominic's words had meant. "You'll never be treated like that again." The promise lingered in the air, and for the first time in her life, Sarah believed it. She believed that things could change. She believed that she didn't have to tolerate disrespect and humiliation. And maybe, just maybe, this encounter with Dominic was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter where she wasn't just the invisible maid, but someone who deserved respect, someone who had the power to stand up for herself. Sarah didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Dominic would continue to show kindness or if his actions were just a fleeting moment of sympathy. But one thing was certain. She would never forget the way he had looked at her, the way he had seen her, and the way he had made her feel. As the night drew on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The beginning of something new, something powerful, and something that would change the course of her life forever. The next few days passed by in a blur for Sarah. She went through her usual routine, working quietly, trying to process what had happened that night. The mansion felt different now. She walked through the halls with a sense of purpose, no longer invisible in the way she once was. The staff didn't treat her any differently, but there was something in the air that made her feel like she had been marked by the events of the night. Her mind often wandered back to Dominic Romano, the mafia boss who had stepped in when no one else would. She couldn't help but wonder what his motives had been. Why had he done it? Why had he come to her defense? She wasn't important to him. She was just a maid, someone who served at his lavish dinners and cleaned his mansion. But that night, he had shown her more respect than anyone ever had. Sarah tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered. It wasn't long before she found herself in the grand dining room again, clearing the table after another high-profile event. The guests were loud, just like before, but Sarah no longer felt small. She felt different. As she moved through the room, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah." She froze. It was Dominic's voice. She turned slowly, her heart racing. There he was, standing at the entrance to the room, his eyes locked on hers. There was no one else around, no guests to witness this. For a moment, she thought she had imagined the whole thing. But then he spoke again. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" His tone was soft, but there was something commanding about it that made her feel like she couldn't say no. She nodded and followed him into a quieter part of the house, her nerves tingling as she tried to maintain her composure. Dominic led her into a study off to the side, away from the bustling activity of the dinner party. The room was dimly lit, with shelves of books lining the walls and a large desk in the center. He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated for a moment before lowering herself onto the chair across from him. She had no idea what this was about, but she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice low and steady, "for what you did that night. I know it wasn't easy." Sarah was taken aback. "I didn't do anything," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened, and he shook his head slightly. "You stood up for what was right," he said. "That takes courage. I don't see that kind of bravery very often." Sarah felt a rush of heat to her face. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone like Dominic. She had always been the one who stayed in the background, unseen, unnoticed. But here he was, acknowledging her, making her feel like she mattered. I couldn't let them keep treating me like that, she said, her voice barely audible. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. I understand, he said. I've been in your shoes before. Not in the same way, but I know what it's like to be underestimated, to be looked down upon. Sarah glanced up at him, surprised. You, she asked. He smiled slightly. I wasn't always the man I am now, he said. I had to fight for everything I have, for every ounce of respect. But the thing is, you don't need to fight alone. Sarah was stunned by his words. She had never imagined that someone like Dominic would understand what she had gone through, let alone offer to help. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Dominic's gaze never left her. You don't have to say anything, he said. I just wanted you to know that you're not invisible to me, and you never will be again. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she wasn't just a maid in someone else's world. She was someone with her own worth, someone deserving of respect. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Dominic nodded, then stood up. I'll let you get back to work, he said, his voice calm but warm. But know that if you ever need anything, you don't have to ask twice. Sarah watched him leave the room, his figure disappearing down the hallway. She sat there for a moment, taking in the enormity of what had just happened. In that brief exchange, Dominic had given her something she hadn't realized she had been missing, dignity. And it was more than she had ever expected from someone like him. She stood up, her mind spinning with thoughts. But one thing was clear, everything had changed. She wasn't the same Sarah who had walked into this mansion just a few days ago. She was stronger, braver, and more certain of her own worth than she had ever been. And that was something no one could take away from her. Days passed, and Sarah found herself adjusting to the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. She continued her work in the mansion, but now there was a sense of confidence that had taken root in her, something she hadn't known she was capable of. Every time she walked through the halls, she felt less like a shadow and more like someone who had been acknowledged, someone who had earned a place here. But even with the change in how she felt, there was still a lingering curiosity about Dominic Romano. After their brief conversation, she hadn't seen much of him. He had come and gone, always surrounded by his security and business matters. But Sarah noticed the small things. The way he would glance at her when their paths crossed, his eyes softening for just a moment before he moved on. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if the respect he had shown her was something more than just an act of kindness. One evening, as Sarah finished her work, she was walking down the grand staircase when she spotted Dominic at the bottom, talking to a group of businessmen. As usual, his presence commanded attention. His sharp suit and calm demeanor made him seem untouchable, a figure of authority in every sense. But tonight, something was different. He caught sight of Sarah as she walked down the stairs, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. The conversation around him seemed to fade into the background as he focused entirely on her. It was as if, in that moment, she was the only one in the room. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to do, but instinctively, she smiled. Dominic's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile in return. It wasn't grand, nor was it meant to be seen by anyone else. It was a moment, fleeting, yet meaningful. Then, without a word, he excused himself from the group of businessmen and made his way toward her. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know why he was coming toward her, but she had a feeling it wasn't just for small talk. Sarah, he said when he was close enough. His voice was as steady as ever, but there was something softer in it now. I need a word with you. His words sent a wave of nervousness through her, but she kept her composure. Of course, Mr. Romano, she replied, though she wasn't sure why he wanted to speak with her. Dominic motioned for her to follow him, and she did so without hesitation. They walked to a small private sitting room just off the main hall. The room was dimly lit, with leather chairs and an atmosphere of quiet intimacy. It felt like a world far removed from the opulent chaos of the dinner parties and meetings that took place in the mansion's grander spaces. Once they were inside, Dominic turned to face her. He seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking again. You've been doing excellent work, he said, his tone even, but there was a depth to it that made her pause. Thank you, Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure how to take his compliment. I appreciate it. He nodded, but his gaze never left hers. I've noticed something in you, he continued, his voice lowering slightly. You carry yourself differently now. Sarah swallowed. It wasn't something she had expected him to notice, and for a moment, she felt self-conscious. I suppose I feel differently, she admitted. I'm not as invisible as I used to be. Dominic's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of approval in his eyes. Good, he said simply. You deserve to be seen. His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and unexpected. She didn't know how to respond to that. She had never been one to draw attention to herself, but hearing those words from someone like Dominic felt like a validation of everything she had been striving for. I don't want you to think this is a favor, Dominic added, his tone shifting slightly, as though he was about to share something important. I'm not doing this out of pity or kindness. I'm doing it because you've earned it. You've proven that you're not just another servant in this house. You're someone who has integrity, who has courage. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. It felt like something out of a dream. She had always thought of herself as just a maid, just a worker in the background. But Dominic was telling her she was more than that. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze steady. Don't thank me yet, he said with a small smile. There's more to be done. But know that I see you. And I always will. The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of pride she had never allowed herself to feel. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone who had earned the right to be seen, to be respected, and perhaps even to be valued. As Dominic left the room, Sarah stood there for a long time, trying to digest everything that had just happened. She had no idea where this new path would lead, but one thing was clear. Her life, her future, was no longer confined to the shadows. She had stepped into the light, and nothing would be the same again. Days passed, and life in the mansion continued with its usual rhythm, but for Sarah, everything felt different now. The shift in how she carried herself, how she saw herself, was profound. The once silent corners of the house now felt like places where she could walk with. Her head held high, and even the most mundane tasks didn't seem as daunting as they once had. The staff noticed the change in her. Whispers began to spread, though no one dared to address it directly. Sarah had become someone who could no longer be overlooked, no longer just another maid in the background. But despite all the quiet changes happening around her, there was still one person she couldn't stop thinking about, Dominic Romano. He had stepped into her life, offering her something she had never expected, respect. It wasn't just his actions that had left an impression on her, but his words. They replayed in her mind every night before she went to bed. You deserve to be seen. You've proven that you're not just another servant. These words echoed in her heart, giving her the strength to stand taller, to act with more confidence. She couldn't help but wonder what it meant for her future. Would things continue this way? Or was this a fleeting moment that would eventually fade, like so many others in her life? Her thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when she was asked to assist with a private meeting in the mansion. Normally, these kinds of gatherings were reserved for the upper echelon of society, but today, Sarah was asked to step in. She entered the room, carrying a tray of drinks for the guests, her hands steady, her posture confident. She did her job quietly, not drawing attention, but still, she felt different. As she moved to the back of the room, she saw Dominic at the head of the table, discussing business with several important figures. He caught her eye for just a second, a brief glance that made her heart skip a beat. She didn't know why, but that look, quiet, knowing, felt like more than just acknowledgement. It felt like something deeper, something unspoken. The meeting carried on, and Sarah quietly took her place by the door, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Dominic. She couldn't shake the feeling that his presence in her life meant more than just a moment of kindness. What did he want from her? Why had he given her so much attention, so much respect? It wasn't until later that evening, after the guests had left and Sarah was finishing her duties, that Dominic approached her again. Sarah, he said, his voice calm, but with a note of something that Sarah couldn't quite place. She turned, startled to find him standing just a few feet away. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. Can I speak with you again? He asked, his tone softer than before. Sarah nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Of course. He led her down a quiet hallway, far from the noise of the bustling kitchen and the echo of the grand ballroom. This time, the space was smaller, more intimate, with just the two of them standing in the middle of it. "I've been thinking," Dominic began, his voice steady as always, "about what you said. About how you feel invisible. You're not invisible to me, Sarah. I've seen what you've been doing, how you've carried yourself." Sarah blinked, unsure if she was hearing him right. "I've always been just a maid," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Dominic smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile that was filled with something akin to approval. "No," he said firmly. "You're more than that. You've proven yourself time and time again, not just through your work, but through your strength. Your courage. You're not just here to serve. You're here because you've earned it." Sarah's heart raced. She had never been spoken to like this. Never had anyone recognize her for anything more than what she did. She had always felt like she was just a cog in the machine, always invisible, always replaceable. But Dominic's words were different. They made her feel like she was seen, like she had worth beyond what was expected of her. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed too small to express the depth of what she was feeling. Dominic's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his presence almost overwhelming in its intensity. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice quiet. "Just know that you're not alone here. I'm watching, and if you ever need anything, you don't have to ask. I'll be there." Sarah was speechless. The sincerity in his words was enough to make her heart skip a beat. She had no idea what this meant, where it would lead, but one thing was certain. She wasn't the same Sarah who had walked into this mansion weeks ago. She was stronger. She was more confident. And she had a sense of self-worth that she had never known before. Dominic's promise wasn't just a simple gesture. It felt like a turning point, a moment that could change everything for her. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she wasn't just the help. She was someone who could stand on her own, someone who mattered. She wasn't invisible anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was finally starting to live the life she had always deserved. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself becoming more accustomed to her new reality. Her once mundane life in the mansion now felt like something entirely different, something filled with potential. She no longer walked the halls with her head down, blending into the background. Instead, she walked with purpose, her steps confident, her shoulders squared. The guests who once mocked her now passed her by without a second glance. But Sarah knew that inside, she had changed. It wasn't just the way others saw her. It was the way she saw herself. And that was what mattered most. But even with all these changes, one question lingered in Sarah's mind. What did Dominic truly want from her? He had been kind, yes, but was there more to it than that? She had spent countless hours reflecting on their conversations, trying to piece together what his actions meant. He had given her respect, something she had never known she deserved, and that had left her both grateful and confused. She had never expected anything from him. After all, she was just a maid. So why had he gone out of his way to make her feel seen? She had been trying to push these thoughts away, focusing instead on her work, on the new sense of self-worth she had developed. But when Sarah found herself alone one afternoon, she couldn't help but wonder once again. Just as these thoughts began to overwhelm her, she was pulled from her thoughts by the sound of footsteps. She turned, her heart skipping a beat, when she saw Dominic standing at the doorway of the kitchen, watching her. His eyes were fixed on her, as though he had been observing her for some time. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. He walked toward her, his movements as steady and controlled as always. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and even, but there was something in the way he spoke that made her heart race. "I've been meaning to talk to you." Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure why, but every time Dominic spoke to her, it felt like her world shifted just slightly. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "What is it?" He paused for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "I want you to know that I've been keeping an eye on things here," he began. "I've seen the work you've been doing, the way you've been carrying yourself." Sarah couldn't stop herself from blushing slightly, unsure of what to say. She had no idea where this conversation was headed, but she couldn't deny that her curiosity was piqued. "I've noticed something else, too," Dominic continued. "It's not just about the work. It's about the way you've changed, the way you've started to believe in yourself." Sarah's mind raced as his words sank in. She had never imagined Dominic would notice something so personal, something she had worked so hard to cultivate. It wasn't just her work ethic he had been observing. It was the change inside her, the quiet confidence that had been building over time. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said, his voice softening. "You've come a long way, and I want to make sure you know that you're not just here to serve. You're here because you've earned your place." Sarah's throat tightened as she struggled to find the right words. She had never been spoken to like this before. No one had ever told her she had earned her place, that she was worthy of being there, not just as a servant, but as someone who mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That means more to me than you know." Dominic gave her a small, approving smile. "I'm glad to hear that. And I want you to know that if you ever want more, if you ever want to move beyond just this job, you have options. I can help you, but only if that's what you truly want." Sarah's mind raced. She had never considered leaving her life as a maid, not even for a moment. But Dominic's words sparked something in her, a possibility she had never allowed herself to imagine. Could she truly leave this life behind? Could she build something more for herself? The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. She had spent so many years thinking that this was all she would ever be, that her life would always be defined by her role in the mansion. But now, Dominic was offering her something different. The idea of having choices, of being able to choose her future, was a powerful one. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision she was starting to face. Dominic nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "Take your time," he said, his voice reassuring. "But know that the offer is always there. You're not just a maid, Sarah. You're more than that." With those final words, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the quiet kitchen, her thoughts swirling. As she stood there, alone, she realized that something had shifted once again. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had the potential to change her life, to shape her future in ways she had never before considered. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Sarah felt like she had the power to decide what came next. The days that followed Dominic's offer were filled with a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions for Sarah. Her life, once so simple, now felt like it had shifted on its axis. She had never imagined a life outside of serving in the mansion, and now, Dominic's words kept echoing in her mind. "You're not just a maid, Sarah. You're more than that." It was a promise, a hope that made her wonder if there was something greater waiting for her, if she was capable of something more than just cleaning and serving. She had always believed that this was her place, her role, the only life she was meant for. But what if Dominic was right? What if she had the potential to do something else, something she had never even dared to dream of? That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her small room, the bed feeling more like a prison than a place of rest. Her thoughts kept returning to the offer Dominic had made. It wasn't just about leaving the mansion. It was about the possibilities that had opened up in front of her. Could she really leave everything she knew behind? Could she build a future for herself, free from the constraints of her past? The questions gnawed at her, and the more she thought about them, the more uncertain she became. But as she lay there in the dark, a small voice inside her told her that she couldn't ignore this feeling, this sense that she was capable of something more. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she couldn't continue living the way she had. She had to at least explore the possibility of something different. After finishing her chores, she found herself walking toward Dominic's office, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say, but she knew that she needed to make a decision. When she knocked on the door, Dominic's voice called out, "Come in." She pushed the door open, stepping inside with a sense of purpose she hadn't known she had. Dominic looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said, his tone as calm as ever. "What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath, her nerves threatening to get the better of her. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice steady, though it trembled slightly. "About the options, about the future." Dominic watched her closely, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if waiting for her to continue. "I don't know what the future holds," Sarah continued, "but I know that I can't keep living this life the way I have. I want more. I want to try at least." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice low. "It's not going to be easy, Sarah, but you're stronger than you realize." The words hit her like a wave. For the first time, Someone was telling her that she could do more, that she was capable of more. It was a feeling she had never had before, and it gave her the strength to stand a little taller. "I'm ready to try," she said, her voice more certain now. "I'm ready to see what else is out there." Dominic nodded, his face showing a rare expression of approval. "Then we'll take the first step together," he said. "But remember, Sarah, you're the one who has to take the lead. I can help you, but it's your journey." Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement, but she also felt something else, hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something incredible. She had no idea where this path would lead, but for the first time, she felt like it was a path she could walk with confidence. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the rest of her life. As the weeks continued to pass, Sarah found herself slowly but surely stepping into the life she had once only dreamed about. Her days at the mansion had changed in ways she never thought possible. With Dominic's guidance, she had started to shift her mindset, realizing that she didn't have to stay in the background, hidden from the world. She was becoming someone different, someone with purpose. It wasn't always easy. She still had moments of doubt, moments where she wondered if she was truly capable of leaving the life she had known for so long. But every time she doubted herself, she remembered Dominic's words, "You're not just a maid. You've earned your place." That reminder kept her going. Sarah found herself thinking about the future more and more. The mansion, once a place of solitude for her, now felt like a space of possibility. She didn't know exactly where her journey would take her, but she knew it would be different. She could feel it in her bones. It was one afternoon, as she was finishing a set of chores in the library, when Dominic approached her again. This time, she wasn't startled by his presence. She had grown used to the quiet way he entered a room, his aura of control and confidence filling the space before he even spoke. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but commanding as always, "I've been thinking about your future." She looked up from the stack of books she was organizing and met his gaze. "What about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've made a lot of progress," Dominic continued, his eyes studying her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "But I think it's time for you to take the next step." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've outgrown this life," he said simply. "It's time for you to move on. I've made some arrangements for you." Sarah's mind raced. She wasn't sure what he meant by arrangements, but she knew it wasn't just a simple change. This was something bigger. "What kind of arrangements?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "I've been in contact with a few people," Dominic explained. "They've been looking for someone like you, someone who has the strength, the determination, the intelligence to make something more of themselves." Sarah felt a rush of emotions, fear, excitement, and disbelief. She had never imagined this moment would come, never believed she would have the opportunity to step into something greater than her current life. But here it was, right in front of her. "I'm offering you a chance," Dominic said, his voice steady. "A chance to leave this world behind and start a new one. A chance to build your future on your own terms. But only if you're ready." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had always wondered what it would be like to live a life beyond the mansion, beyond the constraints of being a maid. And now, it seemed that the opportunity was finally within reach. But was she ready? "I don't know if I can," she said quietly, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "I've never done anything like this before. I've always been just a maid." Dominic stepped closer, his presence warm and reassuring. "You're not just a maid, Sarah," he said softly. "You've always been more than that. You just had to realize it for yourself." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. His words felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to as she stood on the edge of this new chapter. She had spent her whole life thinking she was invisible, that she was destined to remain in the background. But now, for the first time, she was being offered a chance to step into the light. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic smiled, a rare expression that softened his features. "You don't have to do anything just yet," he said. "But when the time comes, I'll be here to help you. You're not alone in this." Sarah stood there for a moment, processing everything Dominic had said. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this mansion months ago. She was stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her, but it wasn't a burden. It was a gift, an opportunity to shape her own future. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice firm with newfound resolve. "I'll take the chance." Dominic's smile deepened, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her heart swell with emotion, pride, approval, maybe even something more. "I knew you would," he said quietly, "and you'll do great." As he turned and walked away, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to find out. The mansion, the life she had known, seemed distant now. She was moving forward, and nothing was going to hold her back. Sarah stood at the crossroads of her life, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. The decision she had made felt monumental, but the weight of it was not as overwhelming as it once might have been. She had a new sense of purpose now, something that kept her going even when the uncertainty of the future loomed large. She had chosen to step into the unknown, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly in control of her destiny. The mansion no longer felt like a prison, but a stepping stone, a place that had been both her home and her limitation. It had given her the foundation she needed to build her life, but it was time to leave it behind. Sarah spent the next few days preparing herself for the change. She no longer spent her time idly cleaning, drifting through each day without purpose. Instead, she took every opportunity to reflect, to learn, and to grow. She knew this was her moment to redefine who she was and who she could become. Each morning, as she carried out her duties, she thought about her next steps. She was grateful for the stability the mansion had given her, but she also knew that she couldn't stay in the shadows forever. She needed to take risks, to push beyond her comfort zone. The decision to pursue a different life was not an easy one. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, the only world that had ever felt familiar. But with every passing day, she grew more confident that this was the right path. Dominic had seen something in her that she hadn't even known existed. He had given her the courage to see herself as someone capable of more than just cleaning and serving. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was ready for whatever it was. One afternoon, as Sarah was finishing up her work, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Dominic standing there, his expression thoughtful but warm. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, "I've been meaning to check in with you. How are you feeling about everything?" Sarah smiled, her heart beating a little faster at the sound of his voice. "I'm feeling good," she replied, her voice full of newfound conviction. "I'm ready to move forward, to take that next step." Dominic nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You've come a long way, and I know you're capable of doing whatever you set your mind to." His words meant more to her than she could express. They were a reminder that she had someone in her corner, someone who truly believed in her. Dominic had given her the tools she needed to break free, but it was her own strength that would carry her forward. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, feeling a surge of gratitude. "For everything." Dominic smiled, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "You've earned every step of this. Now it's time for you to take the lead." The weight of his words sank in, and Sarah felt a new sense of determination. She wasn't just moving forward for herself. She was doing it for all the parts of herself that had been hidden away, for all the dreams that had been buried deep inside her. She was finally ready to bring them to life. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "And I won't look back." Dominic nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit," he said. "I knew you had it in you." The next few weeks flew by, as Sarah continued to prepare for her new life. She spent time gathering everything she needed to start fresh, looking into new job opportunities, researching what it would take to build the life she had always dreamed of. Every step felt like a victory, even the small ones. She no longer felt bound by the mansion's walls. The world beyond was full of possibilities, and she was ready to claim them. Then, one morning, everything was ready. Sarah stood at the front door of the mansion, her bag packed and her heart racing with anticipation. She had said her goodbyes to the staff, and though it was hard to leave the familiar behind, she felt a sense of excitement bubbling inside her. She wasn't just leaving a house. She was stepping into a new chapter of her life. As she walked through the front gates for the last time, she looked back at the mansion. The place that had been her world for so long was now in the distance, but it didn't feel like an end. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger. For the first time in her life, Sarah was in charge of her own destiny. She took a deep breath and looked forward, knowing that she was about to embark on a journey that would define her. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was Sarah, someone who had fought for her own future and won. With each step she took, she knew that her life was hers to create, and that was all she had ever wanted. Sarah stepped out into the world beyond the mansion with a heart full of hope and a mind brimming with possibilities. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something great. The familiar world she had spent so much of her life in, the mansion, the duties, the silence, was behind her now, and before her lay an entirely new chapter. It was an overwhelming feeling, one that filled her with excitement, but also uncertainty. What would life outside the mansion be like? What challenges would she face? She didn't have all the answers, but as she walked away, she felt something deep inside her that kept pushing her forward. Courage. The sun was setting as Sarah walked down the street, the golden light casting a soft glow over everything around her. She wasn't sure where she was going exactly, but that was okay. She had the freedom to decide. Every step she took felt like a declaration of independence. For the first time, she wasn't just going through the motions of life. She was actively choosing it. After a few blocks, Sarah found herself outside a small coffee shop. It was cozy, with a few tables on the sidewalk and soft jazz music playing from inside. She hesitated for a moment before walking in, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The warmth of the shop contrasted with the cool evening air outside, and for a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to relax. She found a small table by the window and ordered a cup of tea. As she sat down, her thoughts drifted to the past few months, her time at the mansion, the moments of doubt, the conversations with Dominic. He had been right. She wasn't just a maid. She had always been more than that. But the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. She had no guarantees. She had no safety net. But she had something even more powerful, hope and the belief that she could build something new. With her tea in hand, she gazed out the window, watching as the world continued to move around her. She had spent so long on the sidelines, watching others live their lives, never truly engaging with her own. But now, she was a part of it. Her future was unwritten, but the pen was in her hands. A few days later, Sarah found herself at a local job fair. The building was filled with people, all looking for something, an opportunity, a new beginning, a way to build a better life. She walked around the booths, nervous but determined, her heart beating a little faster with every step. She stopped at one booth, a small business that specialized in event planning and design. The woman at the booth smiled warmly as Sarah approached. "Hi there," she said. "Are you looking for a new opportunity?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice steady but filled with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The woman handed her a brochure and began to explain more about the company, the work they did, and the values they upheld. Sarah listened carefully, her mind already racing with thoughts of how she could fit into this world. She had never considered working in event planning before, but something about it felt right. It was creative, fast-paced, and required attention to detail, all qualities she had developed over the years while managing the household tasks at the mansion. Before she knew it, Sarah found herself filling out an application form, her pen moving confidently across the paper. She didn't know if this job was meant for her, but she knew one thing. She had to try. She couldn't keep playing it safe, staying within the confines of what was comfortable. She needed to take risks, and this was the first step. The following week, Sarah received a call from the event planning company. They were impressed with her application and wanted to schedule an interview. She was thrilled, but also nervous. The idea of sitting in front of a potential employer, talking about her skills and experiences, was intimidating. But she had faced challenges before. She had overcome obstacles, both external and internal, and had come out stronger on the other side. This was just another challenge to face, another opportunity to prove to herself that she could do it. The day of the interview arrived, and Sarah stood in front of her mirror, taking one last look at herself. She was dressed in a smart, professional outfit, something she had never worn to the mansion but now felt perfectly at home in. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was no longer the shy, invisible maid she had once been. She was Sarah, someone who had the power to shape her own future. The interview went better than she could have imagined. She spoke confidently about her experiences, her strengths, and her desire to learn. The woman who interviewed her seemed impressed, nodding along as Sarah explained how her time at the mansion had taught her skills in organization, problem-solving, and working under pressure. By the end of the interview, Sarah felt a surge of pride. Regardless of the outcome, she had done her best, and that was all she could ask for. A few days later, Sarah received the job offer. She could hardly believe it. She was going to start a new chapter in her life, one that was filled with promise and potential. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was in control of her own story. She was no longer defined by the past. She had created a future for herself, one that was hers and hers alone. Sarah walked into the new chapter of her life with a renewed sense of purpose. The transition from her old life to this new one had been gradual, but now that she had the job offer in hand, everything felt real. The weight of her decision to leave the mansion, to pursue something different, was no longer a burden but a source of pride. She had taken the leap, and now she was living the life she had only dreamed of. Her first day at the event planning company was a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. She arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation. The office was bustling with activity, with phones ringing, computers clicking, and people moving quickly from one task to the next. It was the complete opposite of the quiet, controlled environment of the mansion, but it felt alive in a way that Sarah had never experienced before. Her supervisor, Lily, greeted her with a warm smile and immediately put her to work. "You're going to love it here," Lily said, leading Sarah through the office. "We're a small team, but we work together like a family. And we're always looking for someone who's detail-oriented and hardworking. I can already tell you'll fit right in." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her at Lily's words. It wasn't just about the work, it was about the people she would be working with. She wasn't sure what to expect, but it was clear that this was a place where she could grow, learn, and make a difference. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of her new life. She was learning the ropes of event planning, from managing client expectations to organizing every little detail of an event. It was challenging, but Sarah thrived in the fast-paced environment. She had always been good at handling multiple tasks at once, and now she was applying those skills in a new and exciting way. There were moments of doubt, of course. There always were when stepping into something unknown. But every time Sarah faced a challenge, she reminded herself of the promise she had made to herself. She was going to push through and build a life that was truly hers. One day, a few weeks into her new job, Lily asked Sarah to take the lead on organizing a small event. It was a birthday party for one of their high-profile clients, and Sarah was excited but also nervous. This was her chance to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of handling something on her own. "You've got this," Lily told her. "Just trust your instincts and remember everything we've taught you. I'm confident you'll do a great job." Sarah felt the pressure, but it was the kind of pressure that motivated her. She spent the next few days planning every detail, from selecting the perfect venue to coordinating with vendors. She was meticulous, just as she had always been in her work at the mansion. The day of the event arrived, and Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She arrived at the venue early, double-checking everything to ensure it was perfect. As the guests began to arrive, Sarah worked alongside her team, making sure everything went smoothly. She was hands-on, handling every little detail, and when the event finally started, everything came together beautifully. The client was thrilled, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in her chest. This was her success, and it felt so much sweeter because it was something she had built from the ground up. When the event was over, Lily pulled Sarah aside. "You did an amazing job," she said, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I knew you had it in you. You're going to be a star here." Sarah felt a rush of emotions, pride, gratitude, but most of all, a sense of accomplishment. She had proven to herself that she was more than capable. She had made the right decision to leave the mansion behind. This was where she was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah continued to thrive in her new role. She was learning, growing, and becoming more confident with each passing day. She had made friends at work, people who supported her and believed in her. She no longer felt invisible. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and she wasn't going back. One evening, after a particularly successful event, Sarah sat in her apartment, reflecting on how far she had come. She had left behind a life that was safe but stagnant. And now, she was building a future that was full of promise. She had never imagined that her journey would take her this far. But now, as she looked back, she realized that every step, every decision, had led her here. To this life. To this moment. And for the first time, Sarah felt truly at home in her own skin. She wasn't just a maid or a servant. She was Sarah, someone who had fought for her dreams and was finally living them. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Sarah's life had taken on a new rhythm, one that felt familiar yet entirely different. The daily grind of her job at the event planning company kept her busy, but it was a kind of busyness she had come to embrace. The thrill of working on new projects, the satisfaction of seeing an event come together flawlessly, and the sense of accomplishment when a client's expectations were exceeded. It all fueled her, filling a void she hadn't even realized existed. As time passed, Sarah began to gain more responsibility. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was becoming a core member of the team. Her confidence continued to grow, and with every new challenge, she proved to herself that she could handle it. Yet, despite all the success and progress she had made, there were moments when she found herself reflecting on her past. The mansion, the life she had left behind, it still lingered in her thoughts. She had worked so hard to break free from that world, but at times, it felt like a shadow that followed her, reminding her of where she had come from. One evening, after a particularly successful event, Sarah was walking home, the evening air cool and crisp. She took in a deep breath, savoring the feeling of independence that came with every step she took away from the mansion. As she passed by a park, she noticed a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was Dominic. His presence was unmistakable, even from a distance. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she continued walking, unsure if he had noticed her yet. As she neared the bench, Dominic looked up and caught her eye. There was a moment of recognition, followed by a subtle nod. Sarah stopped, her footsteps faltering. Dominic stood up from the bench and walked toward her. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm, yet with a hint of something warmer. "I didn't expect to see you here." She smiled, though the nerves in her chest were impossible to ignore. "I didn't expect to see you either," she replied. Dominic chuckled softly. "I guess we both have our surprises." He gestured to the bench. "Care to sit for a moment?" Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. She wasn't sure what this meeting would be, but it felt like a moment she couldn't pass up. They both sat on the bench, and for a few seconds, there was an awkward silence. It was strange, seeing Dominic outside the context of the mansion, outside the world that had once felt so confining. "How's everything going?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I mean, with the new job and everything." Sarah took a deep breath. "It's going really well," she said, her voice steady. "I'm learning a lot, and I feel like I'm finally starting to find my place." Dominic nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "You always had the potential to do more. I knew you'd find your way." His words caught Sarah off guard. She had worked so hard to prove herself, but hearing it from him, someone who had been part of her journey, made it feel all the more real. She didn't respond right away, unsure of how to express the gratitude she felt. "It's been a big change for me," she said finally. "Leaving the mansion, leaving everything I knew behind. It wasn't easy, but it was the right decision." Dominic's gaze softened, and he leaned back on the bench, his eyes watching the horizon. "Change is never easy," he said quietly. "But sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes, it's the only way to grow." Sarah nodded, the weight of his words settling into her chest. "I've come a long way," she admitted. "But there are still days when I wonder if I made the right choice." Dominic turned to her, his expression serious. "You did," he said firmly. "You're exactly where you need to be. And I'm proud of you for having the courage to make that change." His words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had spent so long questioning herself, doubting her choices. But here was someone who believed in her, who saw her for who she truly was, not just as the maid she had once been. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than she had anticipated. Dominic smiled, his expression softening. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You've earned everything you've achieved. All I did was remind you of what you were capable of." Sarah felt a rush of emotion. She had come so far, and yet, in that moment, it felt like the journey was just beginning. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop. "I'm going to keep moving forward," she said, more to herself than to Dominic. "I'm not going back." Dominic's eyes twinkled, a knowing look crossing his face. "I didn't think you would," he replied. "And I don't think anyone else will be able to stop you either." Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time, she truly believed in her own potential. She wasn't just someone who had been in the background. She was someone with a future, someone who was capable of shaping her own destiny. As they sat together in the quiet park, Sarah realized that everything she had gone through, the struggles, the doubts, the challenges, had led her to this point. She was no longer defined by the past. She was writing her own story now, one step at a time. Months had passed since that pivotal conversation in the park, and Sarah had blossomed into the person she had always hoped to become. Her new life was far from easy, but every challenge she faced only strengthened her resolve. She had moved into a small apartment in the city, one that was all her own, a symbol of the independence she had worked so hard to achieve. Each day felt like a new opportunity, a fresh start. She had settled into her job at the event planning company, her role growing more significant with each passing week. She no longer felt like a newcomer. She felt like an integral part of the team. Her creativity and organizational skills had been recognized, and she was now entrusted with planning larger events, taking on more responsibility, and even leading some projects on her own. The satisfaction she felt at the end of each successful event was incomparable, and for the first time in her life, Sarah was proud of what she had accomplished. But it wasn't just her work life that had changed. Her personal life had evolved as well. She had made new friends, people who saw her for who she was now, not for where she came from. Her relationships were no longer defined by the walls of the mansion or the limitations of her past. She had created a new world for herself, one filled with opportunities and connections that were based on mutual respect and shared values. Despite the progress she had made, there were still moments when Sarah would pause and reflect on how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still times when doubts crept in, whispering that maybe she wasn't as capable as she thought. But those moments were fleeting. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities. She was no longer the woman who had walked through the mansion's halls, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was someone new, someone strong. One evening, after an event she had planned went off without a hitch, Sarah was sitting in her apartment, sipping a cup of tea, when she received an unexpected call. It was from Dominic. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm as always. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," Sarah replied, smiling to herself at the sound of his voice. "What's going on?" "I just wanted to check in," Dominic said. "I've been hearing great things about the events you've been putting together. You've really come a long way, haven't you?" Sarah felt a flush of pride spread through her. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's been a lot of hard work, but I'm really happy with how everything's going." "I knew you had it in you," Dominic said, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've made something incredible out of yourself." Sarah's heart swelled at his words. She had heard them before, but somehow, they felt even more meaningful now. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah wondered if she had said too much. But then Dominic spoke, his voice quieter this time. "I know," he said simply. "But you did it, Sarah. You did it all on your own." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. She had spent so many years feeling like she wasn't enough, that she wasn't capable of achieving anything beyond what was expected of her. But now, with Dominic's words echoing in her mind, she realized how much she had accomplished. She had built a life from the ground up, a life that was entirely her own. It wasn't just about the job, the apartment, or the friends she had made. It was about the woman she had become. She was no longer defined by the past. She had taken control of her future, and it felt more incredible than anything she had ever imagined. Over the following months, Sarah continued to thrive in her new life. She embraced every opportunity that came her way, always eager to learn and grow. She was no longer afraid of change. Instead, she welcomed it. And with each new challenge she faced, she realized just how strong she had become. But even as Sarah moved forward, she couldn't help but think about what Dominic had meant to her journey. He had been the catalyst for change, the one who had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself. And now, as she looked around at the life she had created, she realized that she owed a great deal of her success to him. Not because he had given her anything, but because he had given her the belief in herself that she had lacked for so long. She had walked away from the mansion that once held her captive, and she had walked into a future that was limitless. As she continued to build her new life, she knew that she would never forget the lessons she had learned along the way. The mansion had been the place where she had started, but it was not the place where she would end. She had moved on, and she was proud of the woman she had become. Sarah wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had taken control of her destiny, someone who had proven that no matter where you start, you can always rise above and create the life you deserve.